A billionaire sat in his car and watched his daughter-in-law laugh at an elderly street cleaner. What he did next destroyed her world, but saved her soul. This 71-year-old woman with a broom was invisible to everyone. She swept the streets before sunrise while the wealthy walked past her like she didn't exist. But on one ordinary Tuesday morning, someone was watching, and what he saw made him question everything he'd built, everything he'd taught his family, and everything he thought success meant. By the end of this story, a single moment of cruelty will transform into the most beautiful lesson about dignity you've ever heard. And I promise you, you'll never look at the people who serve you the same way again. This is the story of Rose Bennett, the woman nobody saw, until one man couldn't look away. Welcome to Reality Untold Stories. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Section 1. The morning everything changed. 1,000 words. You know, sometimes the most important lessons in life don't come with thunder and lightning. They come quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, when the sun is shining and everything looks perfectly normal. But nothing is quite as it seems. And sometimes, the person teaching us the biggest lesson is someone we never expected to notice at all. Let me tell you about a morning that changed everything for one family in a peaceful neighborhood in Melbourne, Australia. A morning when truth arrived not with noise, but with silence. When dignity spoke louder than words. When an elderly street cleaner and a wealthy young woman crossed paths, and a billionaire property developer watched from the shadows, his heart breaking for reasons he never saw coming. Before we dive into this story, I want to ask you something. If you believe that every human being deserves respect, no matter what job they do or how much money they have, would you do me a favor? Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support means the world to us here at Kindness Corner. Now, let me introduce you to Rose Bennett. She was 71 years old, and if you passed her on the street, you might not look twice. She was small, a little bent at the shoulders from years of hard work, with hands that told stories of a lifetime spent doing honest labor. Every morning before sunrise, Rose pulled on her bright orange safety vest, tucked her thin white hair under a wide-brimmed hat, and walked the streets of her neighborhood with a broom and a trash picker. She worked for the local council, keeping the streets clean. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of job people talk about at dinner parties. But Rose did it with quiet pride because she believed in one simple truth. All work done with dignity has value. Rose had lived a full life, full of ups and downs like most of us. She'd raised 3 children on her own after her husband passed away when they were still young. She'd worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs to keep food on the table and shoes on their feet. Now her children were grown, living their own lives in different cities. Her pension wasn't quite enough to cover everything, so she took this job with the council. Not because she had to prove anything to anyone, but because she needed to survive. And because sitting still had never been in her nature. Most mornings, people barely noticed her. Some nodded politely. Others looked right through her, as if she were invisible. A few teenagers once made jokes as they passed by, but Rose just smiled and kept sweeping. She'd learned long ago that dignity isn't something someone can take from you. It's something you choose to carry no matter what. This particular morning, Rose was working her usual route near a row of upscale townhouses. Beautiful modern buildings with glass balconies and perfectly trimmed hedges. The kind of place where every car in the driveway cost more than most people earn in a year. She was sweeping around the communal bins, taking her time, being thorough like she always was. The morning was peaceful. Birds were singing. The air smelled fresh after last night's rain. Everything felt normal. But standing near the entrance of one of the townhouses was a young woman named Victoria Palmer. She was 30 years old, beautiful, and confident in the way people are when life has always been kind to them. She wore designer jeans and a crisp white blouse, her hair perfectly styled, sunglasses perched on her head. She was laughing with 2 friends, coffee cups in hand, enjoying the morning without a care in the world. Victoria had married into wealth 2 years ago. Her husband's family owned half the commercial real estate in the city. She'd never known struggle. never worried about money, never had to wonder if she could afford groceries or medicine. And because of that, she'd never really learned to see people like Rose. Not with cruelty, just with absence. Like they simply didn't exist in her world. What Victoria didn't know was that across the street, sitting quietly in a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, was her father-in-law. His name was William Palmer, 73 years old, a self-made billionaire who'd built his property empire from absolutely nothing. He'd started as a carpenter's apprentice at 16, saved every dollar, bought his first rundown building at 25, and spent the next 50 years building, developing, and creating opportunities. William was respected everywhere he went. People called him Sir. They asked for his advice. They wanted his approval. But lately, he'd felt something missing. A distance between who he'd been and who his family had become. He'd given them everything money could buy. But somewhere along the way, he wondered if he'd forgotten to teach them the most important things. The things money can't buy. That morning, William had driven over unannounced to drop off some documents for his son. He'd parked across the street and was about to get out when he noticed Victoria and her friends.
He smiled, about to wave.
But then he saw Rose approaching the bins nearby, and something in the air shifted.
He watched.
He listened. And what he saw next would stay with him forever. Because sometimes, the people we love the most can disappoint us in ways we never imagined. And sometimes, a stranger with a broom can teach us more about character than a lifetime of success ever could. You ever have one of those moments where you see something and you wish you could unsee it? Where reality hits you so hard that you can't pretend anymore. That's what happened to William Palmer that morning. And honestly, I think it's what needed to happen. From inside his car, William watched as Rose moved slowly toward the bins, her movements careful and deliberate. She wasn't rushing. She was doing her job the way she'd always done it, with quiet attention to detail. She bent down to pick up a piece of litter that had blown against the fence, placed it carefully in her bag, then began sweeping the area around the bins. Victoria noticed her then. And the look on her face, it wasn't anger exactly. It was something worse. It was irritation. Like Rose was an inconvenience. A disruption to her perfect morning. Victoria said something to her friends, something William couldn't quite hear from his car. But he saw their reactions. The way they glanced at Rose and laughed. Not mean laughter necessarily, but careless laughter. The kind that comes from people who've never had to think about what it means to be unseen. One of Victoria's friends gestured toward Rose and said something else. More giggles. Victoria rolled her eyes, took a sip of her expensive coffee, and made a comment that caused all three women to burst into laughter again. And Rose? She heard them. William could see it in the way her shoulders tensed slightly, in the way her grip on the broom tightened. But she didn't look up. She didn't say a word. She just quietly moved to the other side of the bins, giving them space, making herself smaller, stepping aside like she'd probably done 1,000 times before. That's what broke William's heart. Not that Victoria had been unkind, though that hurt too, but that Rose had learned to expect it. That she'd developed a way of moving through the world that made her invisible on purpose, to avoid conflict, to avoid embarrassment, to avoid being a problem for people who saw her as less than human. William sat frozen in his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He felt something rise in his chest, something painful and complicated. Disappointment,
Shame.
anger, sadness. All of it mixed together. This was the woman his son had chosen to marry. The woman who would one day, perhaps, raise his grandchildren. And she didn't even see people like Rose as worthy of basic courtesy. But here's the thing that really got to William. He realized in that moment that maybe this was partly his fault too. He'd worked so hard to give his children and grandchildren a comfortable life. He'd built his business so they'd never struggle the way he had. Never know hunger. Never know what it felt like to be looked down on. But in protecting them from hardship, had he also protected them from empathy? Had he made their lives so easy that they'd forgotten how to recognize struggle in others? William had grown up poor.
Dirt poor.
His father had been a factory worker who died young from lung disease. His mother had cleaned houses to keep the family afloat. William remembered what it felt like to be invisible. to be the kid with holes in his shoes, to be the teenager who couldn't afford to go on school trips, to be the young man who ate beans on toast for dinner 3 nights a week so he could save enough to buy his first property. He'd climbed out of that life through sheer determination and hard work, and he'd promised himself that his family would never know that kind of struggle. But now, watching Victoria laugh while Rose quietly swept around them, he wondered if he'd done his family a disservice. Because comfort is important, but character is essential. And character isn't built in moments of ease. It's built in how we treat people when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when kindness costs us nothing but means everything to someone else. Rose finished her work near the bins and began walking down the street, her small frame getting smaller with every step. She moved slowly, her broom over her shoulder, her trash bag in the other hand. Just another invisible worker doing an invisible job. Victoria and her friends went back to their conversation, already forgetting Rose existed. But William couldn't forget. He sat in his car for another 20 minutes after Rose disappeared around the corner. He didn't get out to deliver the documents. He didn't call his son. He just sat there thinking,
Processing.
feeling something shift inside him. His phone buzzed several times with business calls and messages. Important people wanting his attention. Deals worth millions needing his approval. But he ignored them all. Because in that moment, something more important was happening. He was seeing his family clearly for the first time in years.
And he didn't like what he saw.
The question was, what could he do about it? How do you teach empathy to someone who's never needed it? How do you show someone the value of human dignity when they've never had their own dignity questioned? William knew he couldn't just lecture Victoria. That never worked. People don't change because you tell them to. They change because something inside them shifts, because they see something that makes them question themselves. So William started forming a plan. Not a punishment, not a dramatic confrontation, but something quieter. Something that might actually reach her heart instead of just her ears. Because the truth is, most people aren't cruel on purpose. They're just asleep. They're walking through life, not paying attention. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one conversation, one encounter to wake them up. William started his car and drove home. But the image of Rose, quiet and dignified, stepping aside to make room for people who didn't even see her, stayed with him. And he knew exactly what he had to do. 3 days later, William called his son and daughter-in-law and invited them to dinner.
Nothing unusual about that.
He often had them over to his sprawling home overlooking the harbor. They'd share a meal, talk about business, catch up on family news. But this time was different. This time, William had a purpose. Victoria arrived at the house that evening looking stunning as always. She wore a blue dress and heels, her makeup perfect, her smile bright. She kissed William on the cheek and complimented the flowers in his entrance hall. His son, James, was in a good mood too, talking excitedly about a new development project they were breaking ground on next month. Everything seemed normal, comfortable,
Easy.
They sat down to dinner in William's dining room, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. The housekeeper, Mrs. Lynn, had prepared a wonderful meal: roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from the garden, homemade bread still warm from the oven. They ate and talked about light things at first. The weather, an upcoming charity gala, Victoria's new car, James's golf game. William listened more than he spoke, which wasn't unusual. He'd always been more of an observer than a talker. But as dessert was being served, William gently shifted the conversation. "I was thinking the other day," he said, his voice casual but thoughtful, "about something my mother used to tell me when I was young." James and Victoria looked up, interested but not yet concerned. She used to say that you can measure the soul of a person or a family or even a whole society by how they treat the people who have the least power, the people who serve them, the people who work in jobs that most folks don't even notice. He paused, taking a sip of his wine. "My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families, you know. She'd come home exhausted, her knees aching, her hands red and raw. And she'd tell me stories about the different families. Some treated her with kindness, offered her lunch, asked about her life, remembered her name. William's voice was soft, but there was weight behind every word. And some families, well, they treated her like she was invisible, like she was just part of the furniture. They'd have entire conversations in front of her about intimate family matters, never considering that she was a real person with feelings and dignity. Some would leave messes on purpose, just to remind her of her place. Victoria shifted slightly in her seat. Something in William's tone was making her uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. The families who were kind, William continued, those were the families my mother respected. Even if they had less money, even if their houses were smaller. Because she said you could see their character in how they treated her. And the families who ignored her, who looked right through her, well, she always said those people had wealth but no class. Money but no soul. He set down his wine glass and looked directly at Victoria. Not with anger, not with accusation, but with something deeper. Disappointment mixed with hope. I was in your neighborhood the other morning, Victoria. Tuesday, around 8:30. I was parked across the street from your townhouse. Victoria's face went pale. She knew. Immediately, she knew. I saw an elderly street cleaner working near your building. A small woman, probably in her 70s, wearing an orange safety vest. She was doing her job quietly, carefully, not bothering anyone. The room was silent now, except for William's voice. And I saw you and your friends laughing. I couldn't hear what you said, but I could see the way you looked at her. I could see the way she moved away, making herself smaller, giving you space. Like she'd learned over years of living that the best way to avoid trouble was to be invisible. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Her hands trembled slightly on the table. William, He held up a gentle hand. I'm not telling you this to shame you, Victoria. I'm telling you this because I love you. Because you're part of this family. And because I failed you. That surprised her. You failed me? Yes, William said firmly. I worked so hard to give my children, and now you, and any future grandchildren, a life of comfort. I wanted you to never know struggle, never know what it feels like to worry about money or security. But in doing that, I realize now that I may have accidentally taught you that comfort is the same as character. That success means you're somehow above other people. And that's my fault. Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now. James reached over and took her hand. William's voice softened even more. That woman you saw, that street cleaner, she's somebody's mother. Somebody's grandmother. She's a human being who wakes up every morning and does honest work to survive. She has a story. She has feelings. She has dignity, whether anyone recognizes it or not. He leaned forward slightly. And one day, Victoria, you might have children. And those children will learn how to treat people by watching you. They'll learn what matters by seeing what you value. They'll develop their character based on the example you set every single day, in small moments, when you think nobody's watching. The weight of his words hung in the air. I'm not asking you to be perfect, William said gently. I'm just asking you to see people. Really see them. To recognize that the person cleaning the street, or serving your coffee, or taking out your trash, they're not background characters in your life story. They're the main characters in their own stories. And they deserve to be treated with the same respect you'd want for yourself. Victoria couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears falling onto her expensive dress, her heart breaking open in a way it never had before. Because sometimes love means telling hard truths. And sometimes the people who love us most are the ones brave enough to hold up a mirror and show us who we've become. Victoria didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the darkness of her bedroom, staring at the ceiling while James slept peacefully beside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rose's face. Or rather, she saw what she'd failed to see before, a real person, with a real life, with feelings and struggles and dignity. The shame was overwhelming. Not because William had yelled at her, because he hadn't, but because he'd been right. And somewhere deep inside, Victoria had known it even in that moment on Tuesday morning. She'd felt a small twinge of discomfort when she'd made that comment and her friends had laughed. But she'd pushed it away, dismissed it, moved on with her day. How many other times had she done that? How many other people had she looked through instead of at? How many workers, servers, cleaners, delivery drivers had she treated as invisible? Victoria thought about her own childhood. Her parents had been comfortable, not wealthy like William, but comfortable enough. They taught her to be polite, to say please and thank you. But somehow, she'd learned along the way that politeness to equals was important, but attention to those below her station was optional. When had that happened? When had she become the kind of person who could laugh at someone doing honest work? The next morning, Victoria couldn't eat breakfast. She felt sick with guilt and shame. But more than that, she felt something else stirring inside her. A desire to change. To be better. Not because William had told her to, but because she genuinely wanted to. She spent the day thinking, really thinking, about who she was and who she wanted to be, about the woman she saw in the mirror and the woman she wanted to become. That evening, she made a decision. The next morning, she would wake up early and find Rose. She didn't know exactly what she would say, but she knew she needed to say something.
To apologize.
To acknowledge. To see her. Tuesday morning came. Victoria set her alarm for 6:30, something she never did. She dressed simply, in jeans and a plain shirt, no makeup, no designer accessories. She wanted to be real, not polished, just human. She walked the streets of her neighborhood, looking for Rose. It took almost an hour, walking block after block, before she finally spotted that familiar orange vest in the distance. Victoria's heart pounded.
Her palms were sweaty.
She felt like a child about to confess to breaking something valuable. But she kept walking. Rose was sweeping a sidewalk near a small park, her movements slow and methodical. She hadn't noticed Victoria approaching. "Excuse me," Victoria said softly. Rose looked up surprised. Her expression was cautious, neutral. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. Just careful. Victoria started, then stopped. The words she'd practiced in her head suddenly felt inadequate. "I wanted to apologize." Rose tilted her head slightly, confused. "Last week, Tuesday morning, outside my townhouse. I was with some friends and you were working near the bins. And Victoria's voice cracked. "I was unkind. I didn't see you as a person. I made jokes and my friends laughed, and you had to move away, and I'm so sorry." Rose's expression softened slightly, but she didn't speak. Victoria pulled a bottle of cold water from her bag, held it out with shaking hands. "It's hot this morning. I thought you might be thirsty." For a long moment, Rose just looked at her. Then, slowly, she set down her broom and accepted the water. "Thank you," Rose said quietly. Her voice was kind. Not cold, not angry. Just kind. "What's your name?" Victoria asked. "Rose. Rose Bennett." "I'm Victoria. Victoria Palmer." They stood there for a moment, two women from completely different worlds, connected by a simple exchange of water and words. "I've been thinking a lot this past week," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About how I move through the world. About who I've become. And I don't like it. I don't like that I could look at someone like you and not see a person. Not see a mother, or a grandmother, or someone's friend. Just an inconvenience." Rose's eyes glistened slightly. "We all have our journeys, love. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do after." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "I want to do better. I want to be better." "Then you will be," Rose said simply. She patted Victoria's arm gently. "The fact that you're here, that you apologized, that you see me now, that's already better." They talked for a few more minutes. Rose told her a little about her life, her children, her work. Victoria listened, really listened, in a way she'd never listened to someone like Rose before. When they parted ways, Victoria felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the weight of shame she still carried. Because she'd done something real. Something honest. She'd acknowledged her failure and taken a step toward change. Over the following weeks, Victoria began to notice people she'd never really seen before. the young man who delivered her groceries, the woman who cleaned the gym she attended, the elderly security guard at the shopping center. She learned their names.
She asked about their lives.
She looked them in the eye and saw them as human. It wasn't easy at first. Old habits are hard to break. Sometimes she'd catch herself falling into old patterns, and she'd have to consciously choose differently. But slowly, genuinely, she began to change. And Rose? She continued her work, sweeping the streets with the same quiet dignity she always had. But now, a few times a week, a well-dressed woman in a nice car would stop by with cold water or a kind word. And the two of them, from such different worlds, had become something neither expected. They'd become friends. 6 months passed. The seasons changed. Summer turned to autumn, and the streets of Melbourne filled with golden leaves that Rose swept with the same patient care she brought to everything. William watched his daughter-in-law's transformation with quiet satisfaction. He never mentioned that morning again. He didn't need to. The change in Victoria was evident in 1,000 small ways. The way she spoke to service staff. The way she paused to acknowledge people instead of rushing past them. The way she'd started volunteering at a community center, teaching art to elderly residents. But the real moment that showed William's words had truly reached her came on a cool autumn afternoon. William was having lunch at an upscale cafe in the city when he noticed Victoria at a nearby table with several well-dressed women, clearly a ladies' lunch gathering. He was about to go over and say hello when he noticed something that made him pause. The young waitress serving their table, probably no more than 20 years old, accidentally knocked over a glass of water while clearing plates. It spilled across the white tablecloth, and the girl's face went bright red with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, grabbing napkins, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry." The other women at the table looked annoyed, pulling their handbags away from the spreading water, making subtle expressions of irritation. But Victoria? She immediately stood up and helped the girl blot the water, speaking to her gently. "It's absolutely fine, honestly. Accidents happen. Don't worry at all." "I'm new," the girl whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "This is only my 2nd week, and I keep messing things up." Victoria looked at her with such kindness. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Lily, I promise you this is nothing. You're doing great. Everyone spills things when they're learning. I once spilled an entire tray of drinks at my first job. We all start somewhere." The relief on the girl's face was immediate. The other women at the table had already moved on, checking their phones, but Victoria stayed focused on Lily until the girl was calm and smiling again. When Victoria sat back down, she caught William's eye across the cafe. He raised his water glass slightly in acknowledgement. She smiled back, a real smile that reached her eyes. That evening, William invited James and Victoria over again. But this time, it wasn't for serious talk. It was just for dinner, for family time, for connection. As they sat on his terrace watching the sun set over the harbor, William said to Victoria, "I saw you today. At the cafe."
She looked surprised.
"You were there?" "I was. I saw how you treated that young waitress. With dignity and kindness." He paused. "I'm proud of you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I think about Rose almost every day, about how I treated her, about how she still showed me grace even after I'd been so thoughtless. She taught me more in 5 minutes than I'd learned in years." "That's the thing about dignity," William said thoughtfully. "You can't buy it. You can't fake it. It's something that comes from inside. And Rose has it in abundance, not despite her circumstances, but because of her character." James, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "I never knew about that morning. Victoria told me eventually. And honestly, it made me examine myself too. How many times had I walked past people without really seeing them? How many times had I treated service like something I was entitled to rather than something to be grateful for?" William nodded. "We all need reminders sometimes. I built an empire, but my mother, who cleaned houses, taught me more about being a good man than all my business success ever did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors change in the sky. "Rose still works her route," Victoria said softly. I see her most Tuesday mornings. We chat for a few minutes when I bring her water or coffee. She told me last week that she's proud of me. Can you imagine? This woman who has every reason to hold a grudge, who I treated so poorly, told me she was proud of me for trying to grow. That's grace, William said. That's what separates good people from everyone else. Not perfection. Not never making mistakes. But the ability to forgive, to see potential in others, to believe people can change. As the evening wore on and the stars began to appear, William felt something he hadn't felt in years. A sense that his family was on the right path. Not because they were wealthy or successful, but because they were learning what truly mattered. Money could disappear. Businesses could fail. Status could evaporate. But character, genuine character, would last. And it would be the foundation on which his grandchildren, when they came, would build their lives. Before James and Victoria left that night, Victoria hugged William tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for caring enough to tell me the truth. For loving me enough to hold up that mirror. I know it wasn't easy. The people we love deserve our honesty," William said, "even when it's uncomfortable." As he watched their car drive away, William thought about Rose, still working her route at 71, still showing up with dignity and grace. She had no idea the impact she'd had. She probably thought that Tuesday morning was just another day of being invisible. But she'd changed a family. She'd taught a powerful lesson without saying a word, just by being who she was. Just by carrying herself with quiet dignity even when no one seemed to notice. And isn't that the truth about real character? It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists, steady and true, whether anyone's watching or not. Sometimes the most powerful teachers are the ones who never meant to teach at all. They're just living their lives with honor, and in doing so, they show the rest of us what it means to be truly human. Rose Bennett, with her broom and her orange vest and her patient, steady presence, had reminded a billionaire property developer and his family what really matters in this life. Not what you own, but who you are. Not what you achieve, but how you treat people along the way. And that lesson? That's worth more than all the money in the world. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about how you see and treat the people around you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what's one small act of kindness you'll practice this week? Because sometimes, all it takes is one person deciding to see another person, really see them, to change everything.